In this video, I want to talk about the staff that are connected to the representatives that we have in Congress. As we've talked about, there are 435 members of the House of Representatives. And that number, as we mentioned earlier, came into being in 1910. After the 1910 census, the House increased from a number in the 380s, I think it's 386, went up to 435 from 1900 to the 1910 census. And for the last 100 years, we've had 435 reps. Even though we've had a population in this country that has more than tripled. We went from just over 90 million in 1910, and now we're sitting at a population in 2010. With the census, it'll be about 310 million people. Dramatic increase in population, but yet our representation has remained the same. Now, you might think, well, it's good that we keep a cap on government because we don't want more politicians and so forth, and maybe there's an argument to be made there. But interestingly, we actually have had a dramatic growth in the House of Representatives over the last 100 years. Now, what am I saying? Well, the number stayed 435, but here is how many staff, in terms of the legislation that governs how the House operates, they get staff, employees that are approved for each member of the House. Did you know that in 1919, how many staff were approved for each House member? 2. 2 staff members in 1919 that were allocated each of the 435 reps. Now, what happened over the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and so on, is we had this dramatic population growth that I mentioned. And guess what the staff has done? It has grown dramatically. So that in 1979, and by the way, since 79, the number's been the same. But do you know how many staff got approved in 1979 and that is still true today? 22. So we've had an 11-fold increase in the amount of staff, employees who are supporting the business of the House. And what's even more frustrating and frankly dangerous about that is that because we have so many committees, because the government's involved in so much of our economy, we've got all these committees, all these meetings and so forth, and because there's only 435 members, elected members, staffers get sent at times to some of these meetings. I mean, we're talking about important legislative, governmental, national issues where we've got unelected and unaccountable people going to these meetings. So if you add the 435 along with the 22 times 435, you're talking about 10,000 employees that are connected to the business of the House of Representatives. So lest anybody think that there hasn't been a dramatic growth in the amount of staff, government employees relative to the House of Representatives, then you're not looking at the data. You can clearly see that we have thousands and thousands of people, but realize that 90% of these people, over 90%, are unelected and therefore they're unaccountable. And would that we perhaps convert some of these staff to being unaccountable and unelected and unaccountable, and convert them to being elected and accountable representatives so that they can be watched, that they can be monitored, that they can be accountable as they should be. So we have a huge amount of labor, government labor, that you and I as taxpayers are paying for staff. So we have all kinds of opportunities to shift around this labor to make it more effective and more accountable so that you and I can see better government.